Darnell Mitchell had not been back in Cloverdale for more than 20 minutes when he saw her. He was still lifting boxes out of the truck, his 5-year-old son half asleep in the passenger seat, the boy's brown skin catching the late afternoon light as his head lolled against the seatbelt. And there she was, standing across the street with a dish of baked macaroni and cheese like she had been waiting for him all along. She was tall and dark-skinned, her hair wrapped in a satin scarf, wearing a simple sundress that moved with the breeze. He did not know her name yet. He did not know what she had survived. All he knew was that she looked at him and said, "You don't have to do this alone." And something inside him cracked wide open. Her name was Simone Carter, and she lived in the house directly across the street. Darnell learned this within the first 5 minutes of standing on his new front porch, holding a warm dish of macaroni and cheese he had not asked for, watching his son Jalen press his face against the truck window to stare at the woman who had just appeared out of nowhere. She told him her name the way people in small towns do, casually, like it was something he should have already known. Then she pointed to the house behind her and said she had lived there for 6 years, that she worked as a therapist at the clinic on Birch Lane, and that the previous owner of Darnell's house had been a quiet old man who kept to himself. Darnell thanked her and carried the macaroni inside. The house smelled like dust and something faintly sour, like old wood left too long without air. The walls had cracks running through the plaster, and the kitchen faucet dripped a slow, steady rhythm that echoed through the empty rooms. Jalen stood in the hallway, clutching a stuffed bear, looking up at his father with the kind of trust that made Darnell's chest tighten. The boy had never had a permanent home. They had bounced between a base apartment, then his ex-wife's mother's place during the divorce, then a motel outside Richmond for 3 weeks, while Darnell scraped together enough money to close on this house. Jalen was 5 years old, and this was the first time he would have his own bedroom. Darnell had served 2 tours overseas before coming back to a marriage that no longer recognized him. His wife, ex-wife now, had told him plainly that the man who came home was not the man she married. She was not wrong. He had lost weight, lost sleep, lost the ability to sit in a quiet room without scanning every doorway. The divorce finalized 7 months before the move, and by then, Darnell had already stopped fighting for anything except custody. He got shared custody every other weekend and holidays, which felt like losing even when the judge called it fair. Cloverdale was the town where he had grown up. His grandmother had raised him 3 blocks from this very house, braiding stories about the neighborhood's history into every walk to the corner store, every Sunday dinner, every evening spent on her porch watching the fireflies come out. The black families in Cloverdale had roots that went back generations, and Darnell's were among them. Coming back here felt less like a homecoming and more like a retreat, but at least the ground beneath his feet was familiar. The first week was all labor. Darnell patched the porch railing. He replaced the leaking faucet. He painted Jalen's room a pale blue because the boy had asked for sky color. Every evening he sat on the front steps after Jalen fell asleep, staring at the street and wondering if he had made the right call. And every evening, Simone's kitchen light was on across the road, a warm square of yellow in the dark. She waved once from her window. He lifted his hand back, that was all. But Simone did not stop at macaroni and cheese. On the 3rd morning, she appeared at his door with 2 cups of coffee and a name, Gloria, the woman who ran the farmer's market on Saturdays, and told Darnell that if he needed fresh produce on a budget, Gloria gave discounts to veterans. Darnell had not told Simone he was a veteran. She must have heard it somewhere from someone because that was how Cloverdale worked. Everyone knew everything before you had a chance to say it yourself. The town had always been that way. His grandmother used to say that gossip in Cloverdale traveled faster than Sunday morning church bells, and she was never wrong about things like that. By the end of the 2nd week, Simone had introduced him to half the town without making it feel like charity. She brought him to the diner on Broad Street where a man named Terrence gave Jalen free pancakes and called him Little Soldier. Terrence was a big man with deep brown skin and a booming laugh that made the whole restaurant feel like somebody's kitchen. He had served in the Navy decades ago and kept a framed photograph of his old crew behind the register. When he saw Darnell's posture, the way he held himself, the way his eyes swept the room before he sat down, Terrence recognized a fellow veteran without needing to ask. Simone mentioned that the hardware store on Cedar Road had a weekend discount and that the owner, Wendell, was looking for part-time help. Wendell was a wiry man in his 60s who wore the same faded work shirt every day and spoke in short, precise sentences. He had run the store for nearly 30 years, inheriting it from his father, who had opened it during a time when black-owned businesses in small towns were both a necessity and an act of defiance. Simone told Darnell about the community board at the library where people posted odd jobs, fence repairs, lawn work, furniture assembly, things a man with military training and strong hands could do easily. Every suggestion was delivered the same way. Matter of fact, no pity, no performance. What unsettled Darnell was not the help itself, but the way Simone looked at him when she offered it. She did not look at him like he was broken. She did not look at him like a project. She looked at him like she understood something about starting over that most people only pretended to understand. There was a steadiness in her that felt earned, not inherited, like she had built it from scratch after something had knocked it down. He noticed small things, the way she sometimes glanced at her phone and then set it face down on the table quickly, as if the screen had shown her something she did not want to see, the way she always locked her front door twice before stepping off the porch, the way she paused sometimes in the middle of a sentence, as if checking the words before letting them out, the habit of someone who had learned that speaking freely could have consequences. He filed these details away without asking about them. Jalen took to Simone faster than Darnell expected. The boy was shy with most adults, often hiding behind Darnell's leg when strangers spoke to him. But with Simone, something was different. She crouched down to his level when she talked to him. She asked him questions about his stuffed bear, its name, its favorite food, whether it snored at night, and listened to his answers with the kind of seriousness that children recognize as real. She never talked over him or simplified her language the way some adults did with kids. She spoke to him like he mattered, and Jalen responded to that respect instinctively. One afternoon, Jalen drew a picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a blue house. He pointed to the tallest one and said, "That's Daddy," then the medium one. "That's Simone," then the smallest. "That's me." He had colored all 3 figures with the brown crayon, pressing hard to make the skin dark and warm. Darnell stared at the picture for a long time after Jalen went to bed that night. A month in, and Darnell could no longer pretend this was just neighborly kindness. He and Simone had fallen into a rhythm that felt too deliberate to be accidental. She helped him sand the kitchen cabinets on a Saturday morning, their hands moving in parallel, sawdust settling on their arms like a shared secret. He fixed the loose step on her back porch that Sunday. They drove together to pick Jalen up from his first day of kindergarten orientation, and when the boy ran out of the building holding a crayon drawing of a fire truck, he showed it to both of them equally, as if they were a unit. At the farmer's market the following weekend, Gloria looked at the 3 of them and smiled in a way that said she had already made up her mind about what this was. Gloria was a round-faced woman with silver locks and a voice that carried across 3 booths. She sold collard greens, sweet potatoes, and homemade preserves, and she had a habit of giving unsolicited life advice along with every purchase. She looked at Darnell and Simone standing together, Jalen perched on Darnell's hip, and said, "Now that right there looks like something God put together on purpose." Darnell felt it. He felt it when Simone brushed past him in the narrow hallway of his house, and her shoulder touched his arm. He felt it when she laughed at something Jalen said and looked at Darnell to share the moment, her eyes catching his for half a second longer than necessary. He felt it like a low hum beneath every interaction, growing louder each day, and it terrified him because the last time he had let himself feel this way about someone, It had ended in paperwork and silence, and a 5-year-old asking why Daddy lived in a different house. Now, one evening after Jalen was asleep, and Simone was sitting on his porch drinking the last of a bottle of wine they had split, she said something that landed harder than she probably intended. She told him she could see him pulling back, that every time they got close to something honest, he found a reason to stand up, check on Jalen, change the subject. She said it without accusation, the way a person who understood avoidance from the inside out could name it without judgment. Darnell stared at the dark street ahead and said nothing for a while. The cicadas were loud that evening, filling the silence with their electric hum, and somewhere down the block a porch light flickered on and off like a hesitant thought. Then he told her the truth. He said he did not trust himself to do this right, that his track record with people who mattered was not good, that Jalen was the only thing he could not afford to get wrong, and everything else, including whatever was building between them, felt like a risk he had no right to take. He told her that where he came from, the men in his family loved hard, but disappeared harder. His father had left before Darnell turned 2. His uncle had drifted in and out of his cousins' lives like weather. Even his grandfather, by all accounts a good man, had worked himself into such absence that his grandmother once said she was married to a memory more than a man. Darnell did not want to continue that pattern, but he also did not know how to break it without breaking something else in the process. Simone set her glass down on the porch railing. She looked at him directly, her dark eyes steady in the dim light, and said that she was not asking him for a guarantee. She was asking him whether he was willing to try, not perfectly, not fearlessly, just honestly. Darnell sat with the question like it weighed something physical. He thought about the house behind him, half repaired and full of boxes he still had not unpacked. He thought about Jalen's drawing of 3 stick figures. He thought about the way Simone locked her door twice every night, as if she too knew what it felt like to not be safe. And before he could overthink it, before the old machinery of doubt could kick in and shut him down, he said yes. Saying yes turned out to be the easy part. Living inside that yes was something else entirely. In the days that followed, Darnell found himself doing something he recognized from the military, scanning for threats. Not physical ones this time, but emotional. He watched for the moment Simone would see him clearly and decide he was not worth the trouble. He watched for the moment Jalen would get too attached and then get hurt. He watched for the moment the town would start talking, and he knew it was only a matter of time, because Cloverdale did not let anything stay private for long. It started at the diner. Terrence refilled Darnell's coffee one morning and asked casually whether Simone was the one helping him settle in. The way he said it carried a weight that had nothing to do with coffee. He grinned that wide grin of his and added, "She's good people, brother. Don't overthink it." At the hardware store, Wendell mentioned that Simone was a good woman and that she deserved someone steady. The implication sat between them like a stone on the counter. Wendell said it while measuring out nails, not looking up, the way older black men sometimes delivered their most important advice, sideways, embedded in routine, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. Even Gloria at the farmer's market tilted her head one Saturday and told Darnell he looked happier than the first time she had met him, then glanced at Simone with a smile that made the observation feel like a verdict. She pressed a jar of peach preserves into his hand and said, "On the house," for sweetening up. Nobody said anything cruel. Nobody needed to. The awareness that his life was being observed and narrated by people he barely knew was enough to make Darnell's skin tighten. He had grown up in this town, but he had forgotten what it meant to live in a place where your business belonged to everyone. He began pulling back in small ways he hoped Simone would not notice. He stopped suggesting they eat dinner together during the week. He kept their conversations shorter, more surface level. When Jalen asked if Simone could come to his first real day of kindergarten, Darnell said maybe, which the boy understood correctly as no. Jalen did not argue. He simply nodded and turned back to his coloring book with a resignation that no 5-year-old should have mastered. At night, lying in bed with the ceiling fan clicking above him, Darnell argued with himself. One voice said he was protecting his son. Another voice said he was protecting himself and calling it parenting. He thought about his ex-wife's words during the divorce, that he had a gift for being physically present and emotionally absent at the same time. He had hated her for saying it. He hated himself more for knowing she was right. Simone noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a therapist, and more than that, she was someone who had spent years learning to read the distance people put between themselves and the things they wanted. She could hear what people meant underneath what they said, and she could feel the temperature of a room shift before anyone else acknowledged the chill. She did not confront him immediately. Instead, she gave him exactly the space he seemed to be asking for, and the absence of her felt louder than her presence ever had. 3 days passed without her knocking on his door. Jalen asked about her twice. Darnell told him Simone was busy with work, which was probably true but felt like a lie. The boy accepted it the way children accept things they cannot change, quietly, with a flicker of something in his eyes that looked too much like understanding. On a Friday evening, Simone texted him a single line. There was a cabin her friend owned on the lake about 40 minutes north, and it was empty this weekend. She said Jalen could come or not. She said it was just an invitation, not a test. Darnell read the message 3 times. Then he called his ex-wife and asked if she could take Jalen for the weekend. It was not his scheduled time to hand him over, but she agreed without asking why. She had always been better at flexibility than he gave her credit for, and lately he had been trying to acknowledge that instead of keeping score. He dropped Jalen off Saturday morning, drove home, and sat in his truck for 10 minutes before texting Simone back. He told her he would drive. The cabin was small and plain, set back from the water behind a row of birch trees. They arrived in the late afternoon and spent the first hour doing nothing important, carrying bags inside, opening windows, figuring out the old stove. The quiet between them was not comfortable and not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists when 2 people know a conversation is coming and neither wants to start it. They ate sandwiches on the dock as the sun dropped behind the trees, the water turning from blue to gold to something darker. The air smelled like pine and mud and the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing along the bank. And then Simone set her plate aside and looked at him in that way she had, direct and patient, like she could wait as long as it took. Darnell spoke first. He told her that he had been pulling away and that he knew she knew. He said the town was watching them, and it made him feel like every move he made was being graded. He said he was terrified of failing again, not just with her, but with Jalen, with the house, with the entire idea that he could build a life that held together. He said that in the military the rules were clear. You followed orders. You completed the mission. You came home, or you did not. But here, in this civilian life with its soft edges and open choices, he did not know what the mission was anymore. He did not know what good enough looked like. And every time he got close to something that felt like happiness, a part of him started counting down to the moment it would be taken away. He said he had watched too many black men in his family reach for something good and then sabotage it because they did not believe they deserved it. He did not want to be that man, but the pattern was in his blood like a second heartbeat, and some nights he could feel it pulsing louder than his own intentions. Simone listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she did not try to fix what he had said or reframe it with clinical language. Instead, she told him something about herself that she had never said out loud to anyone in Cloverdale. She said that before she moved to this town, she had been in a relationship for almost 4 years with a man who controlled every corner of her life. He chose her clothes. He monitored her phone. He convinced her slowly and methodically that she was too broken to survive without him. He told her that no one else would want her, that her darkness, both the shade of her skin and the weight she carried inside, made her unlovable to anyone with options. When she finally left, She drove 8 hours straight with nothing but a bag in the back seat and moved into the house across from where Darnell now lived. She rebuilt everything from the ground up. Her career, her friendships, her ability to sleep through the night without checking the locks. She found a church community that welcomed her without interrogation. She planted a garden in her backyard and learned that growing something from nothing was possible if you were patient enough to trust the soil. And she told Darnell clearly that she did not do all of that to become someone's rest stop. She would not be the woman who helped a man heal just to watch him walk away once he felt better. The honesty of it hit Darnell like cold water. He understood what she was saying. She was not issuing a threat. She was naming the thing she could not survive again, and in that naming, she was asking him to decide. Not with promises or grand gestures, but with the only currency that mattered between two people who had both been wrecked. She was asking him to show up. Not perfectly, not without fear, just consistently, honestly, with both hands open. Darnell looked at the lake and then back at her. The last light of the day was catching the edges of her face, the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbones, and he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had seen since coming home. Not because of how she looked, but because of what she had survived and still chose to remain soft enough to try again. He told her he could not promise he would not make mistakes, but he could promise that he would not disappear. That when things got hard, he would stay in the room. Simone held his gaze for a long moment, and then she nodded once, like a contract had just been signed without paper. They came back from the cabin different, not louder, not more visible, but steadier. Simone started spending evenings at Darnell's house after Jalen went to bed. They cooked together, trading recipes that had been passed down through their families. Darnell made his grandmother's smothered chicken. Simone made her mother's sweet potato pie. They argued over small things, how to organize the kitchen, whether the porch needed new boards or just sanding, whether hot sauce belonged on eggs. And the arguments felt healthy, ordinary, like proof that this was real and not a performance. Jalen began asking for Simone at breakfast, and Darnell stopped flinching at the sound of it. For the first time since the divorce, the house in Cloverdale felt like what he had wanted it to be. It felt like a home. Then Donovan showed up. It was a Tuesday evening, and Darnell was inside helping Jalen with a puzzle when he heard a car door slam across the street. He looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked in front of Simone's house, a tall man standing on her porch with his hands in his pockets. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, dressed too well for a casual visit to a small town. Simone opened the door, and even from across the road, Darnell could see her body change. Her shoulders pulled in, her posture shrank, as if something inside her was trying to take up less space. It was the kind of shrinking he had seen before, in soldiers who flinched at sounds that were not gunfire, in children who made themselves small to avoid being noticed. It was the body remembering what the mind had tried to forget. The man talked. Simone shook her head. The man kept talking. After a few minutes, Simone stepped back inside and closed the door, and the man stood on the porch a moment longer before returning to his car and driving away. Simone did not mention it that night. Darnell did not ask, but the next morning he saw her through her kitchen window, sitting at the table with her phone in her hand, staring at it the way she used to, face down, then picked up, then face down again. The cycle of someone caught between curiosity and dread. He texted her and asked if she was okay. She replied with a single word. Fine. He knew what that word meant, coming from someone who used language for a living. It meant the opposite. 2 days later, Darnell received a phone call that added a second fracture to an already fragile week. A hospital system in Richmond was offering him a full-time facilities maintenance position. Steady hours, benefits, a salary nearly double what he was piecing together from odd jobs around town. The HR representative said they needed an answer within 10 days. Darnell sat on his back porch with the phone in his hand and felt the ground shift beneath him. Richmond was 3 hours away. Taking the job would mean pulling Jalen out of kindergarten, leaving the house he had just started to fix, and putting distance between himself and the only person who had made him believe that staying in one place was worth it. He told Simone about the offer that evening, and he watched her face carefully as he said it. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She asked him practical questions: what the salary was, what the hours looked like, whether the position included housing. And then she said something that stayed with him long after the conversation ended. She said she would not be the reason he turned down a better life for his son, and she would not be the reason he accepted a worse one. The decision had to be his, made for the right reasons, and she would respect whatever he chose. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever said to him, and it made the choice infinitely harder. Donovan came back on a Saturday afternoon. This time, Darnell was on his own porch when the black sedan pulled up. This time, he watched everything. Donovan got out of the car with the slow confidence of a man who believed he still owned something in that house. He knocked on Simone's door, and when she opened it, he did not wait for an invitation. He stepped forward, close enough that Simone had to step back, and Darnell saw him reach for her hand. Not aggressively, gently, almost tenderly, which made it worse because Darnell recognized the gesture for what it was. It was possession dressed as affection, the kind of softness designed to confuse, to make the recipient question whether they were overreacting, to blur the line between love and control until neither was distinguishable from the other. Simone pulled her hand away, but Donovan kept talking, kept leaning in, kept occupying space that was not his. Darnell's body responded before his mind could catch up. He was off the porch and halfway across the street before he registered that he was moving. Every instinct he had built in 2 combat tours was firing at once. Protect, intervene, neutralize the threat. His hands remembered the weight of a rifle, the geometry of a room, the distance between safety and danger measured in footsteps. But somewhere between his yard and hers, a different voice broke through. It was Simone's voice from the cabin, telling him that she had rebuilt her life by herself, that she had earned her own strength, that she did not need to be rescued. And he understood in that frozen mid-stride moment that if he stormed onto that porch and made this about himself, about his anger, his need to protect, his fear of losing her, he would be doing exactly what Donovan had always done. He would be making her smaller to make himself feel necessary. So he stopped. He stood at the edge of her yard, visible but not advancing, and he waited. Donovan noticed him. The man turned and looked at Darnell with an expression that was half amusement, half challenge. He said something Darnell could not hear, directed at Simone but meant for him, and then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that dared you to react, that fed on your reaction, that won either way. The smile of a man who had spent years turning other people's emotions into weapons he could use against them. Darnell did not move. He did not speak. He stood there like a wall, present and immovable, and let Simone handle what was hers to handle. But later that night, after Donovan finally left and Simone came across the street with red eyes and steady hands, Darnell felt the weight of everything pressing down at once. Donovan was not going away. The Richmond job was ticking like a clock. Jalen had started asking why Daddy looked worried all the time. And the fragile thing Darnell and Simone had built together, this careful, honest, showing up everyday thing, suddenly felt like it could shatter from any direction. He sat on the floor of Jalen's room after the boy fell asleep, listening to his son breathe, and thought, this is the moment where everything either holds or it doesn't. And he did not know which one it would be. Donovan came back a third time. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, and Jalen was at Darnell's ex-wife's place for the midweek visit they had recently agreed to. Darnell was in his garage sorting tools when the black sedan rolled down the street and stopped in front of Simone's house. This time, Donovan did not knock. He sat in the car with the engine running, and Darnell could see him through the windshield, phone to his ear, watching Simone's front door like a man waiting for something to wear down. Simone must have seen the car from inside because she came out before Donovan had the chance to get comfortable. She walked down her porch steps and stopped at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, feet planted. Even from across the street, Darnell could see that something had shifted in her. The woman who had shrunk in her doorway during Donovan's first visit was not the woman standing on the grass now. This version of Simone looked like someone who had spent the last few days remembering exactly who she had become after she left this man, and she was not willing to let him take any of it back. Donovan stepped out of the car slowly, smiling, talking before his second foot hit the pavement. Darnell could hear fragments, words like, "just want to talk," and "you're overreacting," and "I drove all this way." The language of a man who had learned that persistence could be disguised as devotion. Simone let him finish. Then she spoke, and her voice carried clearly across the quiet street. She told Donovan that if he came to her house again, she would call the police. She told him there was no conversation left to have. She told him that the woman he was looking for did not live here anymore and had not lived anywhere for a long time. Donovan's smile faded. He took a step forward, and Simone held up her phone, screen facing him, thumb hovering over the keypad, and said 3 numbers out loud, 911. Donovan stopped. Darnell had crossed the street by then. Not running, not charging, just walking with the kind of deliberate calm he had learned in places where panic could get people killed. He stopped beside Simone, not in front of her, not between her and Donovan, but next to her, and said nothing. He did not need to say anything. His presence was not a rescue. It was a statement. It said, "She is not alone, and you are outnumbered, and this is finished." Donovan looked at Darnell, then at Simone, then at the phone still raised in her hand. He stood there for a long moment, the kind of moment where a man calculates whether his pride is worth more than the consequences. Then he got back in his car and drove away. Simone did not lower the phone until the sedan turned the corner and disappeared. They stood in her yard for a while after that, not speaking. The evening air had cooled, and somewhere down the street a neighbor's radio played something low and bluesy, the kind of music that sounded like it understood what they were feeling better than words could. Simone's hands were shaking, but her face was still. Darnell reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and they stayed like that until her breathing evened out. Then she looked at him and said, "Thank you." Not for protecting her, but for letting her protect herself. Darnell understood the difference. It was the most important thing he had learned since coming home. The Richmond deadline came 3 days later. Darnell sat at his kitchen table, with the offer letter spread out in front of him and a cup of coffee going cold beside it. The numbers were good. The benefits were better. On paper, it was the responsible choice, the kind of decision a good father would make to secure his child's future. But Darnell had spent enough time making decisions on paper to know that paper did not account for the things that actually held a life together. Richmond meant pulling Jalen away from the first school he had ever liked, the first bedroom he had ever called his own, the first place where he had drawn a picture of his family and included someone outside of it. Richmond meant 3 hours of distance from the woman who had taught Darnell that showing up was not a grand gesture but a daily practice. And Richmond meant running again. Not from danger this time, but from the slow, unglamorous work of building something permanent in a place that knew his name, a place where his grandmother's memory lived in the sidewalks and the trees and the angle of the afternoon light. He called the HR representative that morning and turned down the offer. The woman on the phone sounded surprised and asked if he was sure. Darnell said he was. After he hung up, he sat with the silence for a few minutes, waiting for the regret to arrive. It did not come. Instead, what came was a clarity he had not felt since before the military, before the marriage, before everything that had taught him to distrust his own choices. He knew what he wanted. He wanted this house, this street, this town. He wanted Jalen's drawings on the refrigerator, and Simone's voice in the kitchen, and the sound of the screen door slamming shut on summer evenings. He wanted the small life. And for the first time, wanting something small did not feel like failure. It felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. The following week, he applied for a maintenance position at the regional hospital 20 minutes outside Cloverdale. The pay was less than Richmond, but more than the odd jobs, and the hours were steady. Early mornings, home by mid-afternoon, weekends free. He got the call back within 5 days. When he told Simone, she did not say she was proud of him or that he had made the right choice. She said she was glad, simply and honestly, and that was enough. Things moved forward in the way real things do, without ceremony, without a single defining moment, but through the accumulation of ordinary days that began to feel extraordinary only in hindsight. Simone started leaving a toothbrush at Darnell's house, then a change of clothes, then a shelf of books in the living room. Jalen stopped treating her presence as a visit and started treating it as a fact. One morning, the boy came downstairs for breakfast, saw Simone making eggs at the stove, and sat down at the table without comment, as if this had always been his life. He looked up at her and said, "Can I have cheese on mine?" And Simone said, "You know it." And that was the whole of it. Darnell watched from the doorway and felt something unlock in his chest that he had not known was sealed. They argued sometimes, about money, about parenting, about whether Darnell was taking on too many extra shifts at the hospital. The arguments were not quiet or polite, but they were honest, and they always ended in the same place, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, talking it through until the anger cooled and the understanding took its place. Simone once told him that conflict was not the enemy of a relationship. Avoidance was. She said that in too many families, in too many homes like the ones they had both grown up in, love was expressed through endurance rather than communication. People stayed together by never addressing what hurt, and they called that strength. But silence was not strength. It was just a slower way of leaving. Darnell believed her because she lived it. By the time autumn settled over Cloverdale, the house looked different. The cracks in the plaster were filled. The porch had new boards. Jalen's pale blue room now had a bookshelf Darnell had built himself, stocked with books Simone brought home from the library. Books with brown-skinned heroes on the covers, stories about boys who looked like Jalen and did extraordinary things. Every Friday, the kitchen faucet that once dripped in the silence no longer made a sound, and in its place was the noise of something better, conversations and footsteps, and the clatter of plates being set for 3. Jalen's relationship with his mother steadied as well. Darnell had worked to make the transitions easier, packing the boy's bag without resentment, speaking about his ex-wife without bitterness, making sure Jalen understood that having 2 homes did not mean belonging to neither. It was not effortless. There were nights when Jalen came back quiet and withdrawn, and Darnell had to resist the urge to interrogate or fix. Instead, he did what Simone had taught him by example. He sat with his son. He let the boy talk when he was ready. He showed up without demanding anything in return. He learned that sometimes the most powerful thing a father could do was simply be in the room, steady and available, like a lamp left on in the hallway so a child never had to walk through the dark alone. On a Sunday morning in late October, Darnell drove to the next town over and bought a ring. It was not expensive. It was a simple gold band with a small stone, chosen not for its size, but because the woman behind the counter at the antique shop said it had been part of a set that belonged to a couple married for 52 years. Darnell liked that. He liked the idea that the ring already knew how to last. He carried it home in his jacket pocket and kept it there for 3 days, feeling its weight every time he moved, like a question waiting for the right moment to be asked. He did not plan the proposal. He did not rehearse words or arrange a setting. It happened on a Thursday evening after dinner, while Simone was washing dishes and Jalen was drawing at the kitchen table. Darnell stood in the doorway watching them, Simone with her sleeves rolled up, humming something under her breath. Jalen concentrating on his drawing with the tip of his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth. And Darnell felt the fullness of it, the ordinary, irreplaceable weight of a life that was finally his. He walked over to Simone, took her wet hands in his, and asked her to marry him. She looked at him, then at Jalen, then back at Darnell, and said yes, with the same steadiness she brought to everything. Not dramatic, not tearful, just certain, like she had already known and was simply waiting for him to catch up. They married in the backyard on a Saturday in early December, when the air was cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to go inside. Gloria from the farmer's market brought flowers and a jar of her best preserves. Terence from the diner brought a cake he swore he had baked himself, though no one believed him. He also brought his wife, a quiet woman named Pearl, who sat in the front row and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with her initials. Wendell from the hardware store stood in the back row and clapped louder than anyone. He wore a tie for the occasion, the first time anyone in Cloverdale had seen him in one, and he looked both uncomfortable and deeply moved. The pastor from Simone's church officiated, a woman named Reverend Tate, who spoke about love as a daily practice rather than a feeling, about the sacred work of two people choosing each other not once but continuously, through difficulty and doubt, and the ordinary weight of every passing day. Jalen stood next to his father in a clip-on tie and held the ring on a small pillow, and when the moment came, he handed it over with the gravity of someone who understood, even at 5 years old, that this was important. His small brown hands were steady, and his eyes were wide and serious, and when Darnell slid the ring onto Simone's finger, the boy whispered, "We did it," as if the three of them had accomplished something together. Simone moved in officially that same week, though by then it was mostly a matter of carrying the last of her boxes across the street. The house that Darnell had once seen as a symbol of retreat, a place he ended up because he could not afford anything better, had become something else entirely. It was not perfect. The heating was unreliable. The floorboards still creaked in the hallway. The yard needed work that would probably never be finished. But every room held evidence of the life they were building. Jalen's drawings taped to the walls, Simone's books on the shelves, Darnell's tools lined up in the garage beside a pair of small rain boots and a stuffed bear that had seen better days. A photograph of Darnell's grandmother hung in the hallway, next to a photograph of Simone's mother, two women who had never met, but whose legacies had somehow led their children to the same street in the same small town. Home, Darnell had learned, was not a place you arrived at. It was a place you built by choosing to stay. Not once, in some grand declaration, but every single day, through the arguments and the doubts and the mornings when nothing felt easy. It was the honest effort. It was the showing up. It was the willingness to remain in the room when every instinct told you to leave, to trust that the person across from you was doing the same, to believe that two imperfect people could build something whole if they simply refused to stop trying. And for the first time in his life, Darnell Mitchell was exactly where he was supposed to be.